Hello and welcome to This Week in Franchise News with 1851 Franchise. I am Ben Warren, Managing Editor, along with my co-host Alex Lockey, 1851 Editor. Alex, how are you doing?
Great. I'm always pumped up by that intro.
Yeah, I know, it gets me going too. So we got a bunch of good stories this week, including a fun one from Burger King to kick off the week. We always love to see when a major brand like Burger King just completely steps in it online, which they did this week with a let's say a wildly misguided International Women's Day tweet. Can you tell us about that?
Right. So Burger King, from their UK Twitter account, but they also bought advertising in the New York Times for this. So it was an international effort, but they did a big print ad that said "Women belong in the kitchen," and then below it in fine print, it announced that they had a scholarship to get women into chef position jobs. Women actually have a very hard time in the kitchen industry. I actually think it's a super worthy cause to try to promote getting women into leadership positions in the culinary industry. But they also tweeted just on International Women's Day, "Women belong in the kitchen," and it got a really terrible response. You know, Twitter and newspaper are different mediums, and everybody took that. A single tweet can be taken wildly out of context, so you have to be really careful in doing that. And people just love to kick someone when they're down. Look at me. I have never helped pay for a woman's scholarship, but here I feel superior to Burger King, who is doing a lot of good work, because at least I don't say stupid stuff like that online. I can at least feel superior in that way. So I think the big takeaways are: the shock jock stuff is over. You can't just come out there with some mean, shocking "women belong in the kitchen" tweet. Nobody wants to read that in almost any context. It makes a little more sense in print, but you still can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, call me cynical, but I assume they knew that this was going to cause this type of reaction, right? Like they understood what they were doing when they had a tweet that said "women belong in the kitchen" and then followed it up with an explainer. Still, you can't. I don't think that the old rule that there's no bad PR applies anymore, and I don't think that this got quite the reaction they wanted to. On the other hand, we're talking about it a week later. Burger King is still in the headlines, so who knows? I don't know how they do those calculations, but certainly if you're taking advice from 1851 Franchise on your brand marketing, we would advise against this one. This is not the strategy we recommend. Next up, staying in the realm of restaurant franchising, we had more news this week about the COVID-19 bill, which just today passed in the House. But earlier this week, we wrote about how that bill could impact restaurants. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, there's great news. There's $25 billion in it for restaurants specifically, and a lot of that is grants.
Uh-oh, more technical problems. Hopefully Alex will be with us in just a moment here.
Hey, it's just deep in thought, as I sometimes do. Yeah, so $25 billion for restaurants. If you're a franchisor with under 20 locations, you're in. There's 3-week exclusive period for smaller restaurants, minority owned. It's really good to see some investment go straight into restaurants, many of which are saying that they're dead in months. They're looking at their books and just they really needed something like this to come through. So it's fantastic that will happen. But what could really give them a boost is states are opening up. Everyone's getting a big stimulus check, which we saw in every other stimulus check has been a boost for QSR. Unemployment benefits are going to stick around. And there's a lot of other fringe benefits. People look at the 25 billion or they look at the 1,400 checks and those top line numbers, and they tend to think that's everything. But don't forget about unemployment. Don't sleep on these expanded benefits that are putting a lot more money into people's pockets. And then you combine that with some states reopening. And I think the restaurants have what they wanted all along. And that's a chance to go and win or lose on their own terms. That's what they've been asking for, is the opportunity to open up and the opportunity to have their business succeed or fail. But based on typical industry things, the risks they were prepared to face.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of reason to be optimistic about how this bill will impact restaurants. We've talked before about how the previous stimulus efforts were sort of targeted correctly but executed poorly, particularly when it came to restaurants and particularly when it came to franchise restaurants and the sort of issues between what counts as a small business and what doesn't. So I think much of that has been taken into account with this new bill, and I think there's reason to believe that this will be a much more effective stimulus than the last round. Which brings us to more potentially optimistic or reason for optimism in the restaurant industry, which is that a lot of brands are starting to see a lot of potential for pent-up demand this summer. We're expecting to see consumers getting outside again, outdoor dining becoming a big thing again in states across the country, and also just sort of getting back on their feet in general and looking to go spend.
Yeah, I've been hearing a ton about pent-up demand, and Restaurant Business Online did a great roundup of a bunch of big franchisors and restaurant companies' Q4 earnings calls, and you can just control F, pent-up demand. They're all looking forward to the same exact thing. I think it squares with my common sense. I certainly can't wait to go back out to a cool and restaurants I wouldn't have even ever gone to. Now I want to go. Things I would never. I want a Greek salad all of a sudden. I've never ordered one, but I just want to go into a restaurant and get that. There is pent up demand, and people are pointing to it. Combine that with the stimulus, and when they say this too shall pass, all things come to an end. We really hope that we mean it this time, because it's happened with the pandemic a lot.
Yeah. Fingers crossed, people are getting vaccinated. The weather's getting warmer. I think, again, there's plenty of reason to be optimistic right now. Cautiously optimistic, sure.
Right. The biggest downside for third-party delivery apps is warm weather. Trust me, that's what's going to do it to them.
So speaking of the stimulus package which passed today, one thing that was not in that package was a minimum wage hike, something that a lot of the sort of progressive wing of the Democratic Party had been pushing for. Still, that's something that is going to continue being a big issue, particularly for the franchise industry. So you spoke with Matthew Yglesias this morning about that. What can you tell us about that conversation?
Well, I've read a lot of his writing. I never spoke to him. He has a different voice than you'd expect, but he's a very smart guy. He definitely thinks minimum wage reform is coming, probably before the midterms. Mm-hmm. I happen to agree. I think Tom Cotton and some Republicans were talking about adjusting the minimum wage. Not everybody agrees on $15. And so far, what we've seen from the Biden administration is like the huge progressive promises he made on stage next to Bernie Sanders are getting a little bit closer down to earth as his presidency wears on. I certainly think we'll see a wage increase. And the talk with Yglesias was cool because it wasn't, so divisive. It was like for it or against it. It's like, how can we deal with this stuff? The minimum wage is going to go up. Inflation goes up. These things happen, and it's how to deal with it. And one thing he said was that don't be so scared. If the minimum wage jumps up and you have to pay your entry-level employees more, so does everyone else. You're not at a competitive disadvantage here. That doesn't happen. And just personally, I've never spoke to a small business owner that didn't wish he or she could pay their employees more. Everybody wants to be paying 15, 20, whatever an hour. And shifting the wage is going to speed up a lot of things. If you were going towards automation and kiosks, you're going to run there now. And if you were going towards, a different model in any way, then the wage is going to weigh into that. But these are exciting times. You got to count on things to change, and maybe in a big way.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you made a great point about, this is not really And if at this point it's a win, and I think the franchising industry really just needs to be focused on how are we going, whether we treat this as a welcome thing or as a challenge that we're going to fight, how are we going to meet this thing when it happens?
And I think the franchising industry is especially relevant on this because they are the people who employ a lot of teenagers for 12 hours a month at $7.25. And when we talk about living wage, we talk about basically what Yglesias said that I totally agree with, and everyone does, is Americans believe that you shouldn't work 40 hours a week and live in poverty.
Right.
But when we talk about the minimum wage, the worst case concerns are like, well, why should a teenager making 12 hours a week get $15? And I think we just had a great conversation. I look forward to publishing more of that on really the nuance in there and how small business owners can get involved in effective advocacy for what everyone wants. We're all in the same boat. We all want to improve lives for people across the country. We all want to pay people as much as we can, and we all want our businesses to succeed. So look forward to the rest of that interview coming out.
Yeah, we'll have more on that before the end of this month, or certainly in April. But the article that we published today with an interview with Matthew Yglesias has a lot of interesting tidbits, more than what we've discussed here. So definitely check that out, and check out the rest of these articles. They're all up on the site now, and we'll have a new batch of news to go over next week. But for this week, I've been Ben Warren along with my co-host Alex Lockey. Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll chat again next week.
All right.
Take care.